to you. This is the Faulkner Focus. I am Jillian Turner in for Harris today from Washington. Thanks for joining us. So some lawmakers are rallying to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's defense after she faced criticism from within and without her own party, appearing to equate the U.S. and Israel with terrorist groups, Hamas and the Taliban. Omar later said that was not her intent, but here in Washington, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is already trying to move on. She is laser focused, we are told, on downplaying this drama. She's denying that Democratic leadership actually rebuked Omar and instead is now expressing full support for the embattled Congresswoman. Take a listen.
Congresswoman Omar is a valued member of our caucus. She asked her questions of the Secretary of State. Nobody criticized those. Members did become concerned when the tweet that was put out equated the United States with Taliban.
So do you want people to just let it go?
She clarified. We thanked her. End of subject. What other people go out and say is up to them.
Sounds like a yes. So now a former New York State Democratic Assemblyman tells Fox News top Democrats are simply caving here to Omar, and that as a party, the leadership isn't doing enough to combat anti-Semitism.
The leadership of the Democratic Party, they need to stop being cowards, and they need to deal with Omar in an effective way. What in God's name is she still doing on the Foreign Affairs Committee? Why is she still there? You know, why aren't they taking serious action? When is my Democratic Party going to do the right thing?
Let's begin now with Jackie Heinrich, who joins us from Capitol Hill. Jackie, what is happening with that HVAC assignment? Any indication from the Hill this morning that Pelosi may move to consider some kind of removal or a censure?
Not yet from Pelosi, Jillian, but 3 House Republicans are introducing a censure resolution against Congresswomen Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley for, quote, defending foreign terrorist organizations and using rhetoric which contributed to anti-Semitic attacks across the United States. Now, Congressman Jim Banks said pretty pointedly, actions speak louder than squishy words. Speaker Pelosi can let members vote on our resolution, or she can cover for the Hamas caucus and their anti-Israel and anti-American rhetoric. We'll see. Now, we're trying to get a response from the Congresswomen's offices about that Hamas caucus line specifically, which they've used before. But as of yesterday, it appeared the squad was patching things up with Speaker Pelosi after she declined to punish Congresswoman Omar for her comments, despite some lingering concerns from some Jewish Democrats who are also frustrated that this isn't the first time Omar has said something incendiary about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Pelosi said the caucus is moving on after Omar walked back her comments, appearing to equate democracies like the U.S. and Israel with terror groups. But after her clarification, Omar later doubled down on the premise of her question, referring to, quote, victims of U.S. and Israeli abuses in open cases in the International Criminal Court. Now, members of the squad, after slamming Democratic leadership and their Jewish colleagues for how they handled all this backlash, focused blame instead now on the media.
We know that, these very intense news cycles, which, by the way, this whole hubbub started with right-wing news outlets taking what she said out of context. And when we feed into that, it adds legitimacy to a lot of this kind of right-wing vitriol.
So Democrats are really not eager to let this turn into a political game, but there is privately some lingering concern that there has been this history of upsetting comments coming from Congresswoman Omar. However, unclear if any Democrats support that censure resolution coming from those 3 House Republicans this morning. Jillian.
All right, Jackie, thanks so much. We'll check back in with you later.
Thanks.
Let's bring in Jason Chaffetz. He's the former House Oversight Committee chairman. He is also a Fox News contributor. Jason, there's really a lot to unpack with this story. I think the best place to start for us is how Speaker Pelosi is handling the drama and the ensuing fallout. She tells Fox News over the weekend she's not going to consider removing Ilhan Omar from her highly coveted seat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. This is something you well know, Republicans have been pushing for over the last few days. A, because they believe her comments were anti-Semitic, but B, because it was only a matter of weeks ago that Democrats removed another member, Marjorie Taylor Greene, from one of her committee assignments as rebuke for something she said publicly that they disagreed with.
And that's the problem for Nancy Pelosi. She has a double standard problem. The hypocrisy is just untenable there with Speaker Pelosi. She also has a math problem because she only has a 4-seat majority, and she doesn't want to tick off some of the most radical, liberal, far-left members of her caucus because that's the only way that she can stay in power. And so she's trying to dance around it with this rhetoric that makes absolutely no sense. But what these congresswomen are saying, not only about the United States of America, but our men and women, the troops that actually serve in our military, is so wholly offensive that it deserves not only just censure, but I think removal from the Foreign Affairs Committee.
So it sounds like Nancy Pelosi is, doing a game of sort of tap dancing around the political optics here. That is what it is. I mean, we see that both sides of the aisle every day. This is what politicians do for a living. But I want to talk to you now for a second about the substance here, Jason. Ilhan Omar defended her original tweet by saying she did not compare Israel and the U.S. government with Hamas and the Taliban, and that Republicans and the media are taking her tweet out of context. But the reality is this was a tweet that was only a few lines long. There wasn't much context. It spoke for itself. In a laundry list of regimes she disagrees with around the world, she listed the U.S. and Israel, as well as Hamas and the Taliban. So she was actually, in fact, directly equating the U.S. government with terrorist regimes, was she not?
In the one sentence that's out there, she equates the United States of America with the Taliban. It's in black and white. And you can try to dance around and say, oh, well, she walked it back. But she didn't really walk it back. She hasn't gone out there and just totally dismantled this and say, I was totally wrong. I'm going to delete the tweet and everything I said about it. No, she hasn't. And this is not the first time that these types of things have happened from her. I'm all for diversity on the committee, but I got to tell you, this is a particular congresswoman who's supported by other congresswomen who continue to make these appeals that are anti-Semitic, and they are, I believe, anti-USA, to suggest that we are the same as a terrorist organization like Hamas is wholly offensive.
And also, Jason, you know better than most people that members of Congress serving on this committee have a special obligation not to denigrate American allies. There's a problem with calling out Israel in this manner. It's a violation of the policies that this entire committee exists to advocate for. All right, I want to mention this to you real quick. This is coming from 2 separate articles in The Hill warning that Democratic tensions are only going to get worse and arguing they're now boiling over. So one quote here: fights over the filibuster, tensions over Israel, bickering over police funding, and grumbling over immigration policy. The low simmer of internal disagreement is heating up heading into the short summer session, rattling the lid of party harmony and threatening to spill over into a roiling boil. It jeopardizes both Biden's agenda and the Democrats' prospects for keeping the House and Senate in next year's midterms. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the promise of Joe Biden and his administration was he was going to unite America, that he was going to bring our parties together, that he was going to work on compromise. But here we are, and there is no evidence, no true, real effort to bring the parties together to try to find something that will actually be palatable to both sides. They have the thinnest of margins, 50-50 in the Senate and a 4-vote margin in the House of Representatives. You would think they would try to go out and work with conservatives, but no, there's been no effort to that. So if you look at the calendar, the House has been in recess for 3 weeks, but they are going to move a censure resolution. The Republicans can use a privilege resolution to bring that to the floor. I think the Democrats will then table that. But again, you're going to have all kinds of tension because these far radical left progressives want things done, but they don't have a mandate and they don't have the numbers to actually get it done.
Well, Jason, I got to point out in the interest of being fair and balanced here that there is a bit of a dust up in the Republican Party the last news cycle coming into the presidential election, and you guys did just fine over on Capitol Hill. So maybe they'll skate through this, maybe they won't, we'll see, but we'll talk to you about that. I want to pick your brain on it next time we got you on. Thanks so much.
Very good. Thank you.
You bet. Now to a Fox News alert. There are multiple fire crews on the scene of a massive fire explosion at a chemical plant in Rockford, Illinois. Take a look at that footage. That's about 90 miles west of Chicago. Local affiliates on the ground there tell Fox News there was also explosion at the Chem Tool plant. Now, Chem Tool is a major manufacturer of grease in Northern America. This is the company's headquarters location, according to their website. Residents and businesses in the area have been evacuated. Now, we're going to keep you updated as we learn more about this situation, but the pictures right now are speaking for themselves. All right, Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tore into President Biden this weekend as he is meeting with world leaders on his first foreign trip. Netanyahu has now been officially ousted by his government and is lashing out at the United States and a whole host of other countries over their dealings with Iran. Home are accusing President Biden of being weak on Russia and China as the NATO summit kicks off in Brussels. They're asking, is the president really ready to go one-on-one Wednesday with Vladimir Putin? We'll debate that next.
When I hear the administration talk about taking America back, they're talking about back to what President Obama did for 8 years, where America was weak. Everybody likes President Biden. What's important is not that they like America, but that they respect us.
President Biden is joining other world leaders to kick off the NATO summit today in Brussels. This comes ahead of his highly anticipated one-on-one sit-down with Vladimir Putin that comes Wednesday. Biden is not yet even in Geneva, and he's already taking a lot of heat from Republicans and other critics who say he and the entire G7 group of nations have been way too dovish on China and Russia this year. Some are wondering if he's actually going to stand up to Putin behind closed doors. Listen.
What's going to happen this week is things are going to get real for Biden. Here's what Putin knows about Biden. He knows that Biden is weak. Putin's probably going to be looking to see whether or not Biden is actually coherent. Can he put sentences together?
Peter Ducey is live in Brussels. So, Peter, is Devin Nunes right? Are things getting real for Biden today?
So far, Jillian, just in the last few hours since the president has been on the ground at NATO headquarters, he has been trying to put Putin and Russia at the top of the NATO to-do list.
We have Russia that is not acting in a way that is consistent with what we had hoped, and as well as China.
In addition to emphasizing defense and deterrence, NATO is trying to figure out how to confront climate change and cyber hacking, which have been very disruptive to U.S. gas and meat supplies recently because of hackers based in Russia. And Vladimir Putin now claims that he is open to a cyber criminal swap.
Are you open to that kind of a trade with Vladimir Putin?
Yes, I'm open to, if there's crimes committed against Russia, that in fact are, and the people committing those crimes being harbored in the United States, I'm committed to holding them accountable. I heard that. I was told as I was flying here that he said that. I think that's potentially a good sign and progress.
So even though the president said there he's open to a cyber criminal swap with Russia, that's not so, according to the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who says he was not saying, I'm going to exchange cyber criminals. And for his part, Putin says that he sees NATO's new attention to the cyberspace as potential trouble for him.
What people can be afraid of in America, the very same thing can be a danger to us. U.S. is a high-tech country. NATO has declared cyberspace an area of combat. That means they are planning something. They are preparing something. So obviously, this cannot but worry us.
And leaders here have been spending a lot of time talking about Putin, who is not invited, not part of NATO. The president doesn't see him till Wednesday in Switzerland. Jillian?
We will be following that. It is probably the most highly anticipated event of this entire trip for America. Peter Ducey, thanks so much. All right, Gordon Chang joins us now. He's a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, also an author of the upcoming book, The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. So, Gordon, you heard Peter's report there. In terms of looking at the Putin-Biden summit, we got like 100 foreign policy issues on the agenda here. Cyber attacks, human rights violations in Russia, the treatment of Alexei Navalny, Russia appearing to prepare for some kind of ground incursion in Ukraine. If you're the president, how do you even start to prioritize what you're going to press him on first?
I'd start with the most dangerous of Russia's activities, and that's the one that you just mentioned, Jillian, and that is massing troops on Ukrainians' eastern border. As we know, in 2014, Russia took over Crimea. The Obama administration didn't do anything. And that was a pattern that was set by the administration of George W. Bush when we didn't do anything when Putin broke apart Georgia in 2008. So right now, Putin believes he can do anything he wants, and we're going to have to disabuse him of that. And that's the most dangerous time in history, when democracies start to stand up for themselves and protect their friends and allies, because aggressors don't believe them. So right now is a moment of extraordinary danger, even though it may not appear it.
Even though Americans may not feel the urgency of that today, because Ukraine is halfway across the world, the possibility of even a Russian incursion into that territory, as you're saying, Gordon, really is a threat to all of Ukraine's allies. That, of course, includes the United States. I want to ask you about the kind of PR side here. President Biden has said he's not going to have a joint news conference with Putin after his upcoming summit. Take a listen to what he said.
This is not a contest about who can do better in front of a press conference or try to embarrass each other. It's about making myself very clear what the conditions are to get a better relationship with Russia. The bottom line is that I think the best way to deal with this is for he and I to meet, he and I to have our discussion. I know you don't doubt that I'll be very straightforward with him about our concerns.
There's no right or wrong answer here when it comes to these kind of foreign policy tete-a-tetes that world leaders have. Biden says it's not about who can do better at a press conference, but at the same time, isn't it a little bit about that? That's why we do these foreign policy extravaganza trips all the time. It's to meet with world leaders and appear strong and engaged and recommit America's leadership prerogatives, right?
I think it's very important to have a joint press conference with Putin. And the reason is, Biden can say whatever he wants if he's by himself. But when he has his opposite number there, Putin could actually contradict him. And we could get a sense of really what went on. So I think that it would be much better if the two of them appeared at a press conference. We'd have much more visibility into the relationship. So I don't agree with the president on this one.
All right. Gordon, I want to make sure we get to China here today, another hot topic on the NATO agenda. Despite the president urging transparency from China on the origin story of COVID-19, the G7 put out this communique over the weekend. They're calling for another investigation led by the WHO, and the Wall Street Journal editorial board writes today the world's leaders want the same WHO that failed in its first COVID-19 origin study to do another one, this time with ... feeling. Why does anyone think a phase 2 probe would have any more access or do any better? Is there any reason to think that?
No. And by the way, this is not a phase 2 probe. This is a phase 4 probe. There have been 3 WHO missions to Wuhan since this disease started. And in the last one, it was very clear China was not going to hand over raw patient data. Those 174 cases that could be critical in finding the origin of this disease. And at the World Health Assembly meeting a couple weeks ago, China said it's not going to cooperate with the WHO on its soil. So calls for the WHO to investigate this are meaningless. And, one could say they're cynical. I don't know about motive, but the point is, we need to do this on our own. The Western democracies need to act together. All sorts of things are, I think, showing right now that the Biden approach on this is just 100% wrong. And let's remember, WHO was complicit in spreading this disease beyond China's borders. They propagated narratives on contagiousness that they knew were false, and they did some other things. We would not have a worldwide pandemic if it weren't for the WHO.
And if the Chinese government had been interested or in any way serious about investigating, they would have done it a year and a half ago, which is when a legitimate investigation could have actually been conducted of that lab and other places in China that the U.S. has been denied access to. Gordon, Sky News Australia has this newly obtained video. It shows the Wuhan Institute of Virology keeping live bats in cages at that lab, something the WHO's investigators denied. Peter Daszak, the chair of the nonprofit that funded research at that lab, tweeted about a 2020 article. He claims bats lived in the lab. Quote, "This is a widely circulated conspiracy theory. They don't have live or dead bats in them. There's no evidence anywhere that this happened. It's an error. I hope will be corrected." Now, Fox News isn't certain exactly what conspiracy he's referring to in that tweet. He's the same person who thanked Dr. Fauci via email that was exposed a couple of weeks ago for tamping down on the lab leak theory. He also served as an investigator for the WHO. We must note Fox News hasn't independently confirmed the veracity of this bat video, but we're showing it to you and our viewers because it's already publicly out there. It's on social media. People are talking about it. What do you say? I mean, whether or not this video is verified, it looks more and more likely this week that the lab leak theory is gaining credence, does it not?
It certainly is. And Peter Daszak last year actually publicly told the New York Times, look, that Peter Daszak was promoting the natural mutation theory because he wanted to protect his colleagues at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. You know, there's just one sin after another that Peter Daszak has committed, and with the help of Dr. Fauci, because, you know, Fauci and Peter Daszak say, oh, no gain of function experiments there. Well, we have papers that have been issued based upon the research funded by Dr. Fauci's institute that show that China was using gain-of-function techniques on bat coronavirus, the very money that was funneled from the United States government. There's a lot that we need to investigate here.
Yeah, well, the WHO has also, Gordon, I think it's important to point out, revised its global death toll. They think that somewhere between 7 and 11 million human beings have died from COVID-19 over the last year and a half. If true, 11 million, we're looking at nearly double the Holocaust. Good luck to the Biden administration holding China accountable, or any country in the world for that matter. It seems like something that's going to take decades to come to any kind of a resolution. Gordon Chang, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jillian.
You bet. So there is growing fallout now over those leaked tax documents from some of the nation's wealthiest billionaires. Republicans say it was a politically motivated leak to help Democrats. We've got Congressman James Comer on tap. He's one of the Republicans that's now demanding answers from the Justice Department. He's going to join us up ahead. Plus, parents are pushing back after a school board voted to remove the names of all holidays from the school's calendar and is instead referring to them all just as, quote, days off. A lot of folks not so jazzed about that. We'll tell you why coming up next.
It's social media combined with political ideologies and people that are in positions of, perceived power are pushing their personal agendas instead of really doing what they're entrusted to do.
Well, outgoing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spent a good portion of his exit speech yesterday blasting U.S. President Biden. He lashed out after the Israeli parliament, both sides of the political aisle, voted to boot him after a 12-year-long tenure. Netanyahu is accusing Biden of being soft on Iran and endangering Israel's safety. Trey Yingst has the latest on the political fallout from Jerusalem. Hi, Trey.
Jillian, good morning. After more than 12 years, Israel now has a new prime minister. Naftali Bennett will lead the Jewish state and a freshly formed coalition government. The vote of confidence taking place last night here in Jerusalem at the Israeli parliament. Outgoing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was visibly upset in his final moments in office as his supporters heckled Bennett. Netanyahu's final speech directly attacked his successor, saying Bennett doesn't have the credibility or capability to object the Iran nuclear deal. Netanyahu also discussed the Biden administration and its push to restart nuclear talks.
A prime minister in Israel must be capable of saying no to the United States president on matters that endanger our existence, and to back that up with massive action in the Congress, the Senate, and in public opinion in the great democracy which is the United States.
Prime Minister Bennett also promised to keep strong red lines for Israel when it comes to Iranian aggression, and his relations with the U.S. appear to be off to a good start. After Bennett was sworn in, reactions started to pour in from around the world. President Biden was the first world leader to release a statement saying he congratulated the new leader along with Yair Lapid, who will rotate in as prime minister in 2023. The two leaders also spoke on the phone later in the night. Now, the new Israeli government is expected to be tested for the first time tomorrow when a flag march will go by Jerusalem's Old City, possibly stoking tensions with Palestinians there. Jillian?
All right, Trey, thanks for staying on top of this for us. We'll have more on it later in the show. We appreciate it. Now, some top House Republicans are demanding answers from the Justice Department over some of the nation's richest billionaires' tax documents. They were leaked and made public last week. Congressman Jim Jordan is suggesting Democrats are weaponizing the IRS just as President Biden lays out his plans for this major tax hike on the country's wealthiest. Listen.
We're right back to where we were 10 years ago in the Obama-Biden administration. That's right. When Lois Lerner targeted conservatives around the country. So, yeah, this is a problem. I hope there's an investigation here and we get to the bottom of this. But I think in a general sense, Maria, we need to understand that the left controls the left controls big media, the left controls big tech, the left controls the White House, they control the Congress, and most importantly, they control the bureaucracy. So we've got to get a handle on this.
All right, let's bring in Congressman James Comer. He's the ranking Republican on the House Oversight Committee, a very powerful committee. He's among those Republicans demanding answers now from Attorney General Merrick Garland. Sir, thanks so much for taking time for us today. So you and your colleagues are demanding an investigation into this and answers, maybe a briefing from the IRS or White House leaders. I got to ask you, because the talking point from Democrats here, the pushback on all this is, why are you focusing on these leaks when the real issue is that there are billionaires in America who are taking advantage of the U.S. tax code, and they are paying less than the hundreds of millions of hardworking Americans who pay really high income taxes?
Well, everyone knows there are billionaires that take advantage of the tax codes. When Donald Trump was running for president, he talked about that. Republicans want to close the loopholes and make sure that every American pays their fair share of taxes. The issue here is a massive leak from the IRS. It's a felony for any federal employee to leak personal tax information from anyone, regardless of whether they're liberals or conservatives. If you look at that list of 25 billionaires that ProPublica published, and, about half of them were very liberal Democrats. It's not the point of whether they're Republican or Democrat. It's the point that the federal government is violating the trust and working perhaps with the Biden administration for a narrative.
Yeah. That's an important point, sir, that, not all of the people on that list, the billionaires who had their information exposed, are conservative. It's not really about the politics here. It's about ensuring the safety of Americans' private and personal information. To that end, take a look at what the Washington Examiner editorial board argued about IRS budget increases, saying they should be canceled. If taxpayers at any income level are ever to feel any confidence about the security of the information they provide to the government, then the perpetrators of this crime must be identified, arrested, fired, shamed, fined, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. They must even spend time in prison. Do you agree with that, sir? Does that seem like a fitting punishment for whoever the culprit is in this leak?
Well, again, it's a felony to leak private tax information by any employee of the IRS, so I think they should be held accountable. I don't know to what extent, but they should certainly lose their job, and the public should hold them accountable.
Yeah. We're also hearing now, I want to make sure I ask you about this other breaking story while we've got you, which is that we're calls from Republicans now for an investigation into President Biden's special envoy, John Kerry, also, as you know, President Obama's Secretary of State. They're claiming that he is negotiating directly with the Chinese government, and he's not in a Senate-confirmed position right now. He doesn't actually have the authority to do that without any oversight from Congress. What's your I know this is just breaking now, but what's your take on this off the bat, sir?
Well, Congressman Jordan and I have reached out, and we would love to have Envoy Kerry before a congressional committee. As you mentioned, he wasn't approved by Congress, and he's in a cabinet level position. So I think that this is something that certainly the Americans have a lot of questions for John Kerry, especially given the fact that all this information's come out that when John Kerry was Secretary of State, he betrayed America's trust, betrayed the trust of our greatest ally, Israel, in telling Iran secrets, secrets of the military, secrets about Israel. So John Kerry is already on the suspicious list among Republicans, and the fact that he is given this much power by President Biden is very concerning, and I think that he should have some type of confirmation level congressional hearing to where we can ask him questions about exactly what he's talking to China about and exactly what did he do and what did he tell Iran when we were negotiating that terrible Iran nuclear deal.
Interesting. Well, we'll definitely be keeping an eye on tracking this, sir. We'd love to have you back to tell us what kind of progress you're making in the future, if any, on this issue. But thanks for taking time out of your very busy day just back now after 3 weeks. Welcome back to Washington.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. All right, so there is evidence mounting now that the Democratic divide between moderates and progressives is in fact getting wider. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is dismissing a moderate Democrats' bipartisanship as, quote, that old way of politics. Does this signal an entirely new way of doing business? We got the power panel to weigh in on that coming up next. Plus, remember this?